highlight has obviously been that the games have even happened, given the challenges that we've had over the last 18 months, that the games have happened and that the athletes are there participating and celebrating the Olympic spirit, I think is special. And we've heard even the commentary teams that are out there talking about that. I think it's something to appreciate because we almost didn't have one. And last year, 2020, was the first time since World War II that the Olympic Games didn't happen as scheduled. So for me, I think that's the most important thing to remember before we start looking at it, because I think for the first time in a long time, people were asking why. Why do we need to have an Olympics? Is it that important? Because all of a sudden, in our generation, it's the first time we experienced the questioning of a major sporting event like the Olympics, because it was just taken for granted that the Olympics will and should happen. And all of a sudden, when the world changed, people were saying, well, maybe the Olympics aren't that important. And I think the kind of global outpouring of goodwill that happens when you have something like the Olympics shows why they are important. So that is certainly the highlight. And I think that has answered why we need to have an Olympics. And I think the Olympics will continue. It's been quite difficult in South Africa. Again, it goes back to what you're talking about and what this conversation started talking about what it takes to be an Olympian. It takes hours and hours of training. And whilst you're training, you can't work. I mean, that's the bottom line. Training is your work. So what has happened is that when COVID hit, the sports that got back the quickest were the sports which had a product. Okay, so what is a product? A league, something that generates value for someone else, right? So if I've got a football league and I'm the PSL and DSTV say, well, we've signed a contract, you need to give me X amount of games in a season. Don't tell me about COVID. How can we work together to get them back? Because if you want to get paid, then I need my games. Those got back faster. Rugby, cricket, because they have products. They've got leagues which are on TV, which people consume, and when people watch it, then an advertiser advertises. That's the value chain, right? So they were able to get back quicker, and also because then in those ecosystems, the athletes have contracts, right? They get paid every month or however, whatever, at whatever iteration. But the sports that were hardest hit were sports, again, the irony, the sports that produced the most medals for South Africa at the Olympics, swimming and athletics, because they don't have a product, right? Well, what is the product for swimming? What is the thing that happens every year that people pay to watch? Nothing. I mean, historically, you could go to King's Park. I think they charge you $10 to see the championships. But it's not a product in the true sense of it, right? Similarly with athletics, well, athletics, the product was the ultras, okay? That's the stuff that people watch, Comrades, Two Oceans, okay, and the marathons. But those aren't Olympic sports, okay? So if I'm training to run 10,000 meters, 110-meter hurdles, long jump, I only get paid if I'm on the Diamond League, right? So the Diamond League came back, and when the Diamond League came back, Akani could go, and all these people could go. But those who were in that bracket in the middle were like, okay, I'm a good enough athlete, I've qualified for the World Championships, I've been once, but I haven't got a Diamond League invitation. Well, there's no Grand Prix series in South Africa like there was with the ABSA and the Engine and all of that. So there's no product, so I don't have a contract, So whether there's COVID or no COVID, there's no urgency to return to competition because the federation is saying, oh, we've got a sponsor that we are beholden to, that we need to give a product so we can get paid. That didn't exist, you see. So those were the sports that were hardest hit, and that's where a lot of athletes found it difficult to survive. Thankfully, there were some government grants which were paid to athletes, but I don't think it would be enough. I found that talking to athletes last year, they were like literally runners in particular struggling to survive. And what helped most of them are the retainers that they were getting from the professional clubs, Murray and Roberts, Nedbank, and all these big clubs that pay their athletes. But the reason why they pay athletes is for road running, right? Because road running is huge in South Africa. But now road running is mass participation. So it's double-edged, because now mass participation is not allowed under COVID. And I am SPA, and I want 20,000 people at the SPA, ladies, right? Because that's what I'm used to, and that's my market that I'm marketing to. But now I can't get this 20,000 because, well, there's no mass participation. So I'm asking myself, why am I putting the money in? And if I'm asking myself, why am I putting the money in, then all those athletes that are contracted to their clubs, those clubs are like, well, the reason why we put money in is so that people can run races. And when they run races on TV, we get branding out of it. You see? So it's a whole cycle, and it all boils down to the economy of the whole thing. So those that were hardest hit are simply those sporting federations which haven't got a product. So it goes back to what you're saying, Cassie. We've got to stop being about CSI now. And these two codes in particular, swimming and athletics, have got to really think about how they can better monetize, because athletics has been doing some monetization, but it hasn't been as good as it can be. How they can monetize their own products so that it delivers value to a sponsor outside of CSI, because what people don't realize is, federations don't realize, is they've got what sponsors want: people, numbers. But the problem with the federations, they don't know who their people are.
Yes.
Imagine if surfing could tell you, okay, listen, I have got 16,000 surfers in South Africa, and I've got each and every one of their phone numbers and email addresses. That's something valuable, because I'm thinking, I'm selling a new oil for surfing boards. Okay, I'll pay for that on the database, X amount, for a mailing list. All I want is email addresses, and I'm going to send them mails. But so there's lots of ways to monitor, but it starts with knowing who's participating in your sport. How many? How often? Where do they work? How old are they? Are they boys? Are they girls? What shoes are they running in? All these kind of things. What watches do they wear? We don't know. So sporting federations soon need to start approaching this more like a business and less like a charity case. Because it was fine then when people had lots of money. Mass market can say, okay, I've got a CSI budget of 10 million, there we go, take whatever. But now they think, whoa, our stores have gotten looted, we can't give you any money. Until I say, well, are you not trying to sell treadmills? There's lockdown, I've got runners who can't run races, but they still need to train. I've got a database for you of 10,000 runners. Give me 50 Rand per 10,000, that's 500,000. But you need to sell however many treadmills to make that money back, or whatever the case may be. So that's what needs to happen. Otherwise, the sports will close down. I think the few that I have been in contact with, because it's a bit difficult whilst they're in competition, but the few that I've been in contact with say it's a very different Olympics. I spoke to one person who'd been to a number of Olympics, and he said it's very different. I mean, traditionally the US was becoming brash, and what happens at the Olympics is once swimming, for example, participates early on in the first week, they then stay afterwards to support the rest of the team, and then they'll be out on the town and there'll be all of that fun. But now, because of COVID, everyone's had to leave immediately. So all of that would have been happening, I beg your pardon, the tourism benefits to the host nation haven't accrued, and there hasn't been that kind of fun and that usually happens at the Olympics, because by all accounts it is wild, but not in 2021. exactly, it's like the under 23 football, because also what these other federations don't want to do is, it's also again about competition between federations. They don't want to take the shine off their own major event, because now, well, all their stars are participating at the Olympic Games. So football still have a football World Cup, and that's their main event, and they have sponsors and the whole commercial model set up for that. So the under 23 is a nice balance, and historically women's football has always been valued at the Olympic Games because it predates the Women's World Cup. So yeah, there are some solutions like you mentioned, age group, perhaps based on gender, and I think we could see maybe some of the bigger sporting codes adopt that sort of model, copy football. Yeah. And I just think, I think back to the tennis event, and some of the big names saying that so far as tennis is concerned, which is similar to golf, each player has to make their own valuation about where the Olympics ranks, because they've got their Grand Slams or their majors in golf, which are the traditional big events that golfers and tennis players want to win. So I think a lot of the time it depends on the country that the person is from. Certain countries value the Olympics more than others. The US, China, those countries that traditionally are high up on the medals table attach a lot of prestige to the Olympic Games, and being an Olympian in that country counts for something. So if you are from maybe one of the smaller European nations, it may make less sense for you, if I'm Irish, to go to the Olympics. I can rather focus on the majors and make sure that I have, a good British Open or whatever, than, go to the Olympics. But if I'm from the US and I get selected in the Olympic team, being an Olympian counts for a lot in the US. It counts for a lot. I mean, it opens also commercial doors for athletes when you say, I was in the US Olympic team. So those sports, I think, will have a place, but the meat and potatoes of the Olympics will always be swimming and athletics and gymnastics. Those are the most watched events, and they are the historic events which have been there since the beginning. And they are those events that the athletes themselves place as the very pinnacle of their own sport, to win an Olympic medal above winning, a world championship medal in swimming or in athletics or in gymnastics. So I guess that's just the way it is, and it will depend on individual nations. But for the smaller codes that you mentioned, like, we see skateboarding, climbing, surfing, they come and go, rugby sevens. For these ones, it will depend on how they embrace that opportunity, and if they've got anything, because the challenge with the Olympics in the modern age is the financial reward, right? You win a medal, you don't get paid. Whereas if you focus on your own sport, you may well get paid much, much more in some codes. But with these new codes, like I beg your pardon, like skateboarding, like surfing, like climbing, which have got their own tours, this has raised the profile of those sports, because a lot of people who've never watched surfing, who've never watched skateboarding, will now be watching the Olympics and say, oh, okay, this is not bad. But the same is not true for golf or tennis, who have their own big audiences. So I think for those smaller ones, there is a place, and they will use the Olympics to grow. But for some of the other sporting codes, well, it's up to the big name athletes themselves to make a decision about how important it is. Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the average age, so at Tokyo, the average age of the Olympian is 27, right? I think it's 26 and a bit for women and 27 for men. So the average age is 27, which is up 2 years from Rio, which is 25. So Olympians, to become an Olympian, just to go to the Olympic Games, you're somewhere there. So how many years out of school is that? Okay, that's a long time. That's 18 to 9 years.
9 years.
Yeah. So what are you doing in those 9 years? You're training, right? 9 years, you either need to be making money on some sort of professional circuit, or if not, someone needs to be supporting you for 9 years. It's a long time. So We don't have that. We don't have that. And it's in those 9 years that people fall out. The first place we lose potential Olympians is after school. So immediately after school, those who don't get varsity bursaries, I was just talking to one of the coaches, Hans Seystat, who coached for many years, and he's still involved at the Forentu High School, which has produced a lot of athletics Olympians, Palulas and so forth. And he says when the kids leave school, those who don't get bursaries in two years after that, when they're 20, most of them are not even running anymore. So that's the first place we lose them. If they can't get a bursary to go to a Tux, a UJ, somewhere on a sports scholarship, then we lose them. Secondly, then they get into varsity, right? And now you've got like 4 years to perform, or you have to get a job, right? Because after varsity, it's over. You're out of that system where you have a place to eat, you eat in res, you live in res, you go and train. So if in those 4 years you don't make it, then that's where we lose the second batch. So I think that's the challenge, and that's the challenge for the two main sporting codes, swimming and athletics. Because in the other codes, you can turn pro right out of school, right? For cricket, for rugby, and for football. So that's the challenge. And then outside of those two, then it's almost a free-for-all of complete amateurism, where if you're trying to be a weightlifter, you're training at Virgin Active or Planet Fitness, you're kind of juggling things and you're doing everything at once, and the federation office is one guy sitting there by himself. So there, I mean, it's even more difficult. So that's it. Those 9 years are the critical years, because most people, if they can get to one Olympics, will get to a second, right? But it's getting to that first Olympic Games that's the challenge. And for South Africa, we've got a lot of older Olympians. We've got, for example, Precious Mashele he's the only athlete to qualify at the 5,000 meters for South Africa. He's 30 years old. He's making his Olympic debut. He should be making that debut 4 or 5 years earlier than that, but it was a hell of a struggle just to stay alive, and feed himself. I think it's a generational thing, right? There'll always be a great generation. Every nation will have a great generation, and then it takes a while to replace that. America will always have medalists in the sprint events, again, because of the culture. Because we've been used to Usain Bolt, Justin Gatlin, Johan Blake, these are the names that have dominated since Beijing. But before that, I mean, we had, for example, a Turkish guy winning the 200 meters, when there was, again, a generational change before Bolt started winning in 2004. So it does happen that every now and again, the dominant people will retire and move on, and there'll be an opportunity for a set of new athletes to come through. The US, they've got a good system, and in fact, they're a victim of their own success, because a lot of the sprinters that are medaling for other nations are being trained in the US, in the college system. South Africa is also a very good example for that. I mean, Akani is an exception to that rule. You look at this young man, Sean Maswanganyi, he's training in Houston under Carl Lewis, and a few others have gone over to the US on the US college system. So they've got a very good track and field culture, coaching, and pedigree, and they will always have top athletes. But even the Jamaicans themselves, a lot of them, not all, and it's changing nowadays, but historically, a lot of them used to also go through the college system. So it's just a case of the generation changing, and this is the first time that we haven't had a Usain Bolt, because if I'm a Jamaican and I'm running in the same team as Bolt, he inspires me to do well. I don't know how many times I heard Jamaicans say that just being on the team with Bolt allowed them to raise their level, your Nesta Carters and other sprinters. So I don't think it's the end. I just think it's a change, and whenever there's a change, there's an opportunity for new athletes to, you know, to shine. Yeah. Young ladies from Namibia, Mboma and Maslingi, and they were 400 and 800 athletes, 400-meter athletes. The IAAF, I beg your pardon, it's now World Athletics, have barred them from competing in the 400 for the same reasons that Caster Semenya is no longer competing in the 800. So they've competed in the 200, and it's the 200 where a medal, where Mboma received a medal, a silver medal, behind the Jamaican. So, yeah, they're up-and-coming athletes. I think that case is still being attended to. So we'll see what the outcome of that case is, and what they are allowed, you know, to compete in. They have been, even before this, though, these two young ladies, Namibian athletics has been on the rise. You remember a long time ago, Frankie Fredericks, but more recently, Helalia Johannes, who South Africans will be familiar with. She's competed on the Spa Women's 10-kilometer Grand Prix Series, won it in 2019, and then also won a bronze medal at the World Championships in the marathon. So she's coming up in the marathon on Saturday or Friday midnight. With the likes of Gerda Steyn and Yvette van Zyl. So she's also a pretty good athlete. So yeah, they've been putting some effort into their athletics, and they have, because of their closeness to South Africa, can call on some South African coaching expertise, and that's where these two young girls come from. I think it's amazing. I mean, there's the Norwegian Warholm, and then in the men's, and then in the women's, we've got McLaughlin. He set a world record before the Olympics, so this is his second one. And to see an athlete running sub 47 is absolutely amazing. I think it's a case of a purple patch in a particular event, with athletes just you get well, not a perfect, but you get a really good athlete committed to an event, doing well an event, coached well, and they produce a great performance. But what has changed is that I think for the 400 hurdles, these athletes that are winning 400 hurdles have also got very good basic 400-meter flat speed, which wasn't always the case. I mean, the 400 guys would get linked when they ran a 400 flats, you know, somewhere there. But now these guys can run very good 400 flats. So I think the investment in working more on the basic speed has really helped them, and it's just been a wonderful event. The men's 800 meters went yesterday or day before, I can't quite remember with all the time change, was for me underwhelming. I mean, you have 145, two Kenyans, a sprint finish when they taking the bell in 53 seconds, slow, and they're all queuing up behind each other. It takes a very special athlete to have the confidence. Remember, this is not a sprint. You can blow if you don't time it to perfection. You go out hard and you hit the wall and they all come flying past you. So it takes a great deal of confidence and self-belief to go for a fast time in an Olympic Games when everything is at stake. So most times, this is what happens at an Olympics. You get kind of performances in the middle distances. It's only now and then when you have a truly dominant athlete, like let's say London 2012, where David Rudisha, the Kenyan, set a world record in the 800 meters. But he had been running alone for the whole season. You know, for the whole year, he'd been just, you know, doing his thing. So that we do, again, it's a generational change. We don't have that in the 800 meters. This time, we don't have that, you know, in the 1500 meters. The 5,000 meters, there were times when, you know, you had Bekeles and your Gabriel Selesis, who were head and shoulders the best athletes and could go for it. And they would have maybe one or two strong competitors. Think of Paul Tergat and Haile Gebrselassie, that rivalry. But now we don't have that. So as a result, you have this kind of feeling each other out thing, and then sprint finish. So yeah.